Southeastern Turkey, 40 kilometers from the Syrian border. A limestone ridge rises above the Haran plain. From the air, it looks like farmland and scattered dirt mounds. On the ground, beneath those mounds, 20 stone circles wait in the soil. Each circle built with pillars carved from bedrock. Each pillar weighing between 10 and 50 tons. Each one decorated with three-dimensional animals that jump off the surface. Scorpions, snakes, foxes, lions, vultures. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by 7,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates pottery. It predates metal tools. It predates the wheel. And it predates the thing that was supposed to make it possible: settled agriculture. The people who built this monument were not farmers. They were hunter-gatherers, wandering bands who had no villages, no cities, no kings, no tax systems, no scribes. They had flint, they had obsidian, they had animal bone, and somehow they quarried, carved, transported, and erected a stone complex larger and more sophisticated than anything that would appear for the next 5,000 years. The official story says farming came first, population density came second, surplus food came third, social hierarchy came fourth, and only then, at the end of that sequence, did monumental architecture appear. Göbekli Tepe reverses the entire chain. The monument came first, the coordination came first, the belief system came first, and farming arrived later, possibly because the monument demanded it. That inversion does not just challenge one date or one detail. It collapses the foundational narrative of how civilization begins. So how did semi-nomadic groups with stone tools and no written language organize the labor, solve the engineering, and sustain the effort to build a ritual complex that would not be surpassed in scale or sophistication until the age of bronze? That is exactly what we are going to find out. The ridge itself sits at roughly 750 meters above sea level. The name Göbekli Tepe translates to Potbelly Hill, a reference to its rounded profile. For most of human history, the site was invisible. A few scattered stones, a low mound, bedrock outcrops that looked natural. In the 1960s, an American archaeological survey noted the hill and moved on. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt walked the site and recognized that the limestone fragments were not natural. They were worked. He began excavation in 1995. What he found in the first season redefined the Neolithic. The earliest radiocarbon dates cluster around 9600 BCE. That places the beginning of construction at the start of the pre-pottery Neolithic A period when humans were still living in temporary camps, hunting gazelle and wild cattle, gathering wild grains, and moving seasonally across the landscape. There were no permanent settlements in the region, no mud brick houses, no storage pits, no walls, no defenses. The entire toolkit of civilization, as defined by textbooks, did not exist yet. And yet, the people moving through this landscape stopped, gathered, and began cutting pillars out of bedrock. The quarry lies just northwest of the main hill. It is still visible. Inside that quarry, a massive T-shaped pillar lies unfinished, still attached to the bedrock floor. The pillar measures roughly 7 meters long. Its estimated weight exceeds 50 tons. The surface shows clear tool marks, channels cut along the edges, narrow grooves where workers tried to separate the stone from the surrounding limestone. They never finished. The pillar remains there, frozen mid-extraction, a permanent record of the process. To detach a stone that size, you need to cut a trench around the perimeter deep enough to reach underneath. You need to drive wooden wedges into the cracks, soak them with water, let them expand, and hope the stone splits cleanly. You need hundreds of flint blades, because flint dulls fast against limestone. You need coordination. You need time. You need labor rotation. You need water supply. You need food supply. And you need a reason to keep going. Once detached, the pillar has to move. 50 tons is the weight of a loaded semi-truck, except there are no wheels, no pulleys, no metal, no domesticated animals. The only option is human muscle. To move a 50-ton stone across uneven ground, you need rollers, levers, ropes, and at minimum 300 to 500 people pulling in coordinated rhythm. That is not a family group. That is not a hunting band. That is a scheduled, organized, multi-week labor event involving multiple groups who had to agree in advance to show up, work together, and not kill each other. The stone moves from the quarry to the ridge. Distance, between 100 and 300 meters, depending on the enclosure. The terrain slopes. The stone has to be controlled on the descent, lifted over bedrock outcrops, and set into a pre-cut socket in the ground. The socket itself is carved into bedrock. Depth, up to 3 meters. Width, custom fit to the pillar base. This means the builders knew the exact dimensions of the pillar before it arrived. They planned the layout in advance. They coordinated quarry teams and construction teams. And they did all of this without writing, without formal measurement systems, without blueprints. What they left behind is a series of circular and oval enclosures. The largest measures more than 30 meters across. The walls are low, built from unworked rubble stone. The pillars stand in pairs at the center. The outer ring holds additional pillars, smaller than the central pair, but still massive. The central pillars are the true anchors. They rise between 3 and 5 meters above the floor. Their tops are flat, their sides are smooth, and their surfaces are covered with carvings. The pillars are T-shaped. That shape is not decorative. It is anthropomorphic. The vertical shaft represents the body. The horizontal crosspiece represents the head or shoulders. Some pillars have arms carved in low relief running down the sides. Some have hands meeting at the front, fingers spread across a carved belt. Some have foxskin loincloths. Some have three-dimensional foxes climbing the sides. The figures are human, but they have no faces. The top of the T is blank, smooth, featureless. No eyes, no mouth, no individuality. This is not portraiture. This is symbolic. The pillars represent something collective, ancestors, spirits, archetypes, or gods. We do not know. What we know is that the builders invested enormous labor into making them look like people, then deliberately removed the one feature that would make them recognizable. The animal carvings cover the rest of the surface. Scorpions appear frequently, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. Snakes coil across the stone. Spiders, vultures, wild boars, aurochs, foxes, and cranes fill the remaining space. A few pillars show lions in profile, teeth bared. One shows a leopard mid-leap. Another shows a duck. Some animals are carved in flat relief. Others are fully three-dimensional, their bodies emerging from the stone as if caught mid-motion. This is not primitive scratching. This is sophisticated sculptural work. The same level of skill that appears in later Bronze Age temples is already present here, 6,000 years earlier. The animals are not random. They are dangerous. Most of them do not appear in the food refuse piles. The bones excavated from the site belong to gazelle, aurochs, wild sheep, and wild boar. Those are the animals people were hunting and eating. But the carvings focus on predators, on venomous creatures, on scavengers. Scorpions do not provide calories. Vultures do not get hunted. Lions are avoided. Snakes are threats. This is not a menu. This is a symbolic system. These animals represent something. Danger, death, transformation. The boundary between human and wild, between living and dead, between earth and sky. One carving stands out. A human figure, headless, carved in low relief on one of the pillars. The body is visible. The neck ends abruptly. The arms extend downward. Next to the figure, a vulture. Below it, a circle that might represent the sun or the moon. This carving points toward a practice known from later Neolithic sites in the region: excarnation. The dead were exposed on platforms or hillsides, left for vultures to strip the flesh from the bones. The clean skulls were then retrieved, carved, plastered, painted, and kept. Fragments of carved human skulls have been found at Göbekli Tepe. Deep grooves cut into the bone. Intentional modification. The focus on skulls, the headless human, the vulture imagery, all of it fits. Death ritual was not a side feature of this site. It was central. What nobody notices yet is that none of this requires farming. Hunting and gathering can support large, temporary gatherings if the resources are dense enough. The Haran Plain in the 10th millennium BCE was rich. Herds of gazelle moved through in seasonal migrations. Wild cattle grazed the grasslands. Wild wheat and barley grew in thick stands on the hillsides. Nut trees provided protein. The environment could feed a large group for weeks at a time if the timing was right. But feeding people is only part of the problem. You also need a reason for them to show up. For different bands, some of them potentially hostile, to agree to gather at the same place, work together, and not fight. That requires something stronger than food. It requires belief. It requires shared mythology. It requires a sacred anchor. Göbekli Tepe was that anchor, a neutral ground, a ritual center, a place where the boundary between human and spirit was thin, where the dead were honored, where the symbols were legible to everyone who arrived. The architecture itself creates that boundary. You descend into the enclosures. The floor is below ground level. The walls surround you. The pillars tower overhead. The carved animals watch from every direction. You are inside a symbolic space. The structure separates you from the ordinary world. And, once you are inside, the ritual begins. We know they feasted. Tens of thousands of animal bones were found in the fill layers: gazelle, aurochs, wild boar. The bones show butchering marks. They were cooked, eaten, and discarded. The volume of bone suggests events involving hundreds, possibly thousands of people. Communal meals on a scale that required advanced planning, seasonal coordination, and shared labor. The feasting was not casual. It was fuel. The people who gathered here were not just worshiping. They were working, moving stone, carving pillars, digging sockets, erecting enclosures. The feast was the payment. The ritual was the incentive, and the monument was the result. What makes this even stranger is that the largest and most sophisticated enclosures are the oldest. Layer 3, the deepest layer excavated so far, contains the biggest pillars, the most detailed carvings, the most complex layouts. As time progresses, the enclosures get smaller, the pillars get shorter, the carvings get cruder. By the end of the sequence, the site is being filled in, deliberately. The builders did not abandon Göbekli Tepe, they buried it. Starting around 8000 BCE, they began backfilling the enclosures with soil, rubble, animals, bones, and flint tools. The fill was not random, it was controlled. The pillars were protected, the carvings were covered gently. The entire complex was sealed, like a time capsule. Why would you bury your most sacred site? We do not know. But the burial preserved everything. The limestone pillars survived intact. The carvings remained sharp. The enclosures stayed frozen in their original configuration. If the site had been left exposed, wind and rain would have eroded the details within centuries. Instead, the soil protected them for 10,000 years. And the site stayed hidden until 1994. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry surveys show at least 20 more enclosures buried across the hill. Most have never been touched. The excavated portion represents less than 5% of the total site. What lies beneath the rest of the ridge is still unknown. But the pattern is already clear. Göbekli Tepe was not a single temple. It was a ritual landscape. Multiple enclosures, multiple generations. Multiple phases of construction, use, and burial. A project that lasted for well over 1,000 years. Now stop right here, because the real question is not how they built it. The real question is why. What kind of social pressure organizes semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers into a coordinated labor force capable of quarrying, carving, transporting, and erecting 50-ton pillars without metal tools, without wheels, without written plans, and without the food surplus that farming is supposed to provide? The official story has an answer. It says Göbekli Tepe was built by people on the edge of the Neolithic Revolution, people who were just about to invent farming, people who had already figured out seasonal grain harvesting and were experimenting with storage, people who were settling down. Except the evidence does not support that. There are no houses at Göbekli Tepe, no storage pits, no hearths, no domestic refuse, no grinding stones in large numbers, no signs of permanent occupation. The site was not lived in. It was visited. People came, worked, feasted, performed rituals, and left. The site functioned as a hub, a central place, a destination, and the effort invested in building it was so great that it began to change the way people lived. Here is where the timeline flips. 20 miles southeast of Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists found the earliest known domesticated wheat, einkorn wheat. The wild ancestor grows on the hills nearby. The domesticated version shows up in the archaeological record around 8500 BCE, roughly 1,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was already under construction. The domestication was not random. It was deliberate. Someone selected seeds from wild plants, replanted them, selected again, replanted again, and repeated the process until the seeds became larger, the stalks became stronger, and the grains stopped shattering when ripe. That process takes generations. It requires a reason, and Göbekli Tepe provides one. If you need to feed large groups of people gathering seasonally at a sacred site, wild resources are unpredictable. Herds migrate, nut harvests vary, rainfall shifts. But if you can grow grain on command, you can schedule the gathering. You can plan the feast. You can guarantee the labor supply. Farming did not create the temple. The temple created farming. The monument came first. The belief came first. The coordination came first. And agriculture emerged as a solution to the logistical problem the monument created. That is the opposite of every textbook explanation of the Neolithic Revolution. The standard story says surplus food allowed people to stop working full-time on survival and start building temples. Göbekli Tepe says people built the temple first and invented surplus food to keep the project running. This is not speculation. This is sequence. The radiocarbon dates are clear. Göbekli Tepe precedes farming. The earliest domestic grains appear near the site after construction begins. And the social complexity required to build the monument matches the social complexity required to domesticate plants. Both require planning. Both require coordination. Both require multi-generational commitment. Both require belief that the effort will pay off. And both leave a permanent mark on the landscape. What the monument also leaves is a symbolic language. The animals, the pillars, the layout, the orientation, all of it communicates. The problem is we cannot read it. We see the carvings, we recognize the species, we note the repetition, but we do not know what the scorpion meant. We do not know what the vulture represented. We do not know why the human figures have no faces. We are looking at a message written in a language that died thousands of years before writing was invented. But the structure itself tells us something. The enclosures are circular. The pillars face inward. The space is enclosed. You enter from above, descend into the ritual zone, and exit the same way. The layout creates a journey, a threshold, a transition. The carvings reinforce that. Dangerous animals, death symbols, headless figures, vultures. This is not decoration. This is boundary marking. The enclosure separates the world of the living from the world of the dead, the world of humans from the world of spirits, the world of order from the world of chaos. And the ritual performed inside that boundary was powerful enough to bring hundreds of people together, sustain a labor force for generations, and eventually force them to invent a new way of life. The monument did not just reflect society, it restructured society. It created the conditions for sedentism, for farming, for villages, for population growth, for trade, for craft specialization, all the things that define civilization. Göbekli Tepe did not arrive after those things, it arrived before, and it forced them into existence. That inversion is why the site matters, not because it is old, not because the pillars are big, but because it proves that the sequence we were taught is wrong. Civilization did not begin with farming. It began with belief, with the need to gather, with the need to build, with the need to mark a place as sacred and return to it generation after generation. The fields came later. The food surplus came later. The cities came later. What came first was the monument. And the monument was not possible according to the timeline we inherited. Hunter-gatherers were supposed to be small, mobile, egalitarian groups with no central authority, no labor specialization, no capacity for large-scale projects. That model dominated archaeology for a century. It was built on assumptions about social evolution, about the stages of human development, about what people could and could not do without farming. Göbekli Tepe destroys that model. The site proves that hunter-gatherers were capable of large-scale coordination, sophisticated engineering, symbolic art, and multi-generational projects. They did not need kings. They did not need cities. They did not need writing. What they needed was a shared belief system strong enough to organize labor and a landscape rich enough to support it. Both existed at Göbekli Tepe. And the result was a monument that would not be surpassed in ambition or execution for 5,000 years. But here's the thing. Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Similar sites are appearing across the region. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe. All of them feature T-shaped pillars. All of them predate farming. All of them show the same pattern. Large-scale stone construction in the pre-pottery Neolithic, built by people who were not supposed to be capable of it. This is not one anomaly. This is a system. A network of ritual centers spread across southeastern Turkey and northern Syria, all operating during the same time window, all using the same symbolic language, all organized around the same basic architectural form. The pillars, the enclosures, the animal carvings. They repeat. That repetition means the knowledge was shared. The builders were communicating. The sites were connected, and the effort was not local, it was regional. Which brings us to the final question. If Göbekli Tepe was the center of a regional ritual network, if it predates farming by 1,000 years, if it required coordination on a scale that should not have been possible, and if the monument itself triggered the invention of agriculture, then what else did it trigger? What other technologies, social structures, trade routes, and belief systems emerged because this site existed? We do not know yet. Most of the site is still buried. Most of the related sites have barely been touched. The story is incomplete. But the part we can see is already enough to rewrite the origin of civilization. The monument came before the fields. The temple came before the village. The symbol came before the script. Göbekli Tepe is not an outlier. It is the beginning. The stone circles buried under that ridge in southeastern Turkey are the first chapter of a story we were taught started somewhere else. They are the proof that human complexity, human ambition, human creativity, and human belief were already fully formed thousands of years before the first cities rose in Mesopotamia. The builders had no metal. They had no wheels. They had no writing. But they had vision. They had coordination. They had the ability to imagine something that did not exist and then make it real. And when they finished, they buried it, not to hide it, to preserve it, so that 10,000 years later, when the soil was finally removed and the pillars were exposed again, the message would still be there, carved in stone, facing inward. Waiting. The timeline is broken. The monument remembers what the textbooks forgot.